Great, I love that. Happy 4th. Well, almost 4th of July. Looking good? Looking good. You got plans this weekend? Can we just chat for a moment? Is that cool? I'm going to see who's here today. Hey, just so you know, I'm ready to go. I'm ready. Hopefully you're ready too. How many of you know everybody looks better in the dark? I'm just joking. Love you guys. And I look worse in the light, so there you go. Love you guys. But happy 4th. You know, as I was thinking about 4th of July, we're just testing your history. July 4th, 1776, the United States of America declares independence from Great Britain and from the King. And legend has it that one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence signed his name first and boldest and biggest because he was willing to take a stand. And his name was John Hancock. And so today, I think it's only fitting that kind of this holiday weekend that we're going to talk on how we need to stand. And I really think that this series has the potential to impact all of our lives in a significant way, because here's what I know. Here's, I think, what you know, that if you take a stand for the right things at the right time and in the right way, it can change the course of your life. But the opposite is true. If you compromise with the wrong things at the right time, wrong time, and for the wrong reasons, it can impact your life in ways that you've never imagined. It can affect all of us. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the Bible is it's filled with people who were imperfect. I mean, they didn't always get it right. They're ordinary people like you and me, but yet they're great examples of how to stand at the right time in the right way and for the right things. And I don't know who said this, but my mom said this kind of to me and my brothers growing up, and it's stuck with me. You've probably heard this before. But the saying goes like this: if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. You'll fall for anything. And in case you're wondering, we got a definition of stand. I like to go to the dictionary every once in a while. Here's what it means. That's not what it means. There we go. All right, there we go. Here's what stand means. It means to persist in opposition or resistance. But I love this last phrase. It means to be inflexible. Now, believe it or not, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 16, he kind of picks up this thought here about being inflexible. Notice what he says. He says, be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. Now, I really think part of what Paul's saying here is this, that following God requires us to be inflexible at times. It does. It requires us to take a stand. It requires us to persist through opposition. And so what we're going to do over the next couple weeks, I'm excited about this. We're going to look at 5 different stories from the book of Daniel. So go ahead and grab your Bibles, find your place there. In case you're wondering where Daniel is, it's in the Old Testament. You can use your index if you need to. But a great way to think about it is this. You find Isaiah, go to the right. It's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. If you go to Hosea, you've gone too far. So Daniel, we're going to pick up part of his story this morning to see what we can learn about taking a stand. Because what I love about this particular story we're going to read today is there were some guys who were inflexible. There were some guys who were willing to stand out because of their love for God and their devotion to God. Now, to help us all understand what's taking place here, I think we need some context. So the book of Daniel, the king at this time is King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's the king of Babylon. Babylon is the superpower of this day. Now, what you need to know about Nebuchadnezzar is he's wicked, he's evil. He's not a nice guy. And so he goes into Jerusalem with his army, and he has the city of Jerusalem destroyed. Now, this is how wicked he is, though. He also wants to destroy their religion, their worship of God. So he has the temple burned. And to add insult to injury and further humiliation, he takes some of the sacred objects from the temple and takes them back to Jerusalem. Now, another degree of his wickedness is this. Not only does he want to destroy their worship of God, he wants to destroy Israel's future altogether. And so, you may know the story. He takes some of the best and brightest young men in Israel, takes them back to Babylon, indoctrinates them in the Babylonian culture, trains them to be government leaders and advisors. And this is where we pick up Daniel's story. So look with me, Daniel chapter 1, verse 3. Here's the king. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. We'll come back to that. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. So here we go. Daniel and his 3 friends, or his friends, are in BU. They're in Babylon University. That's exactly what's happening here. Now, here's the point, though, that I think we need to focus on for just a minute, and it's this here. What is taking place is intentional. What is happening is very planned out and well thought through. Because understand what the king is trying to do. He's bringing Daniel and his friends into Babylon, and he's trying to influence their thinking, their behavior, and their beliefs. That's what he's trying to do. And it's a well thought out plan. This is intentional. And so what that says to you and me is this. Understand, we have an adversary. His name is Satan, the devil. And his tactics are to influence your thinking, your behavior, and your beliefs. And some of you may be wondering, well, how does he do that? It's one word. The word is culture. I want you to hear me this morning, church. Culture is very powerful. Culture is very, very influential, and the enemy understands this. And so he will use culture to influence our thinking, our behavior, and our beliefs. And he does this in all different kinds of ways. He does it through media. Hello? He does it through advertisements. He does it through music. He does it through movies. He does it through subtle messages like you have to buy this, or you need to think this, or you need to believe this. And I think maybe more so now than ever, God's calling his followers and his church to take a stand. Take a stand. There are some things in our life we have to be inflexible about when it comes to following God. Now, here's the other side of the coin, though. You can't stand out in your own strength. You try to do it, you will fall, and you will fail. We need to stand in God's strength, the strength of God that's available to each and every one of us. And I want you to see this. Paul talks about this in Ephesians chapter 6. He tells us how we can stand out and how we can follow God even in the face of opposition. Show me that, guys. Ephesians chapter 6. Understand this. Put on all of God's armor so that you'll be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. Think about the armor that God has given to us. It's the helmet of salvation. It's the breastplate of righteousness. It's the belt of truth. It's the shoes of peace. It's the shield of faith. It's the sword of the Spirit. God has given us those things so that we can stand tall and stand out in the face of opposition, somebody. Paul says, put those things on. And then notice what else he says. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so that you'll be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. We're going to face opposition. But notice this. Then after the battle, you will still be standing firm. How many of you want to live that kind of life? That even in the face of difficulty, you are still secure and firm in Jesus Christ. We can live that way when we live with God's strength. And Daniel and his friends are a great example of this. But then notice what happens. Verse number 6 of Daniel 1. Here's their names. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. Azariah was called Abednego. Now here's what Bible scholars will tell us. They're kind of guesstimating, but they'll say that these 4 men were anywhere between 12 and 15 years old. So think about what happened. They're uprooted from their family. They're 1,000 miles away from home, and they have been stripped of their identity. The king had their Hebrew names, which was direct correlation to their worship of God. He had those Hebrew names stripped away from them. And he gave them Babylonian names that paid tribute to their Babylonian gods. Talk about culture. And then he gives an order that they have to eat the food from the king's table. Now the problem was that the meat and the wine were dedicated to pagan gods. And so notice how Daniel responds to this news. Verse 8 says, but Daniel, I love this. You have your Bible, you may want to highlight that word. The word is determined, taking a stand, inflexible. Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. And so he asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now here's what's amazing to me, though. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. When Daniel and his friends, when their names were changed and stripped from them, did you notice that they didn't fight? They didn't take a stand when it came to their names being changed. And I think there's something that we can take away from this. They understood who they were. And they knew who they belonged to. They understood that their names were just an outward label. That didn't define them. Can I tell you, church, if you want to stand out for God, you need to know who you are. You don't need to be who the world tells you to be. You need to be who God called you to be. And you need to live your life the way God has called you to live your life. That's how you stand out. You have to know who you are. And then you have to know who you belong to. You're a child of the Most High God. You are His son and you are His daughter if you've put your faith in Him. You're part of His family. That's who you are. That's how you stand out in the face of opposition and difficulty. You know that God is with you. That God's with you. And Daniel and his friends knew that. They knew who they were. But I think there's another bit of truth that we should pay attention to. And it's this. Pick your battles. Pick your battles. How many of you know you don't need to die on every hill? There are some things you don't need to stand out for and you don't need to stand for. But notice where Daniel and his friends drew the line. I think this is great. When they were asked to defy God's name and defame God's name, they said, we're taking a stand. When it comes to our faith and our worship of God, you are not going to influence me. You are not going to tell me what I can and cannot do. I am worshiping God. I belong to Him. I'm created by Him. And so we're not going to eat any of the foods that have been dedicated to pagan gods. We're taking a stand. Now here's what we do sometimes, though. Can we tell on ourselves? How many of you know sometimes when we're in a situation kind of like Daniel maybe, where we can compromise? How many of you know we rationalize things sometimes? Oh, my. Like, we rationalize. We all do this. We all do it. Like, God will understand. I can step across the line because God will understand. I'll just ask for forgiveness. or everybody else is doing it. I don't really want to stand out. I'd rather blend in. Everybody's doing it. God will understand. How about in the case of Daniel and his friends? We have to eat. If we don't eat, we're going to die, and we can't serve God then. Think about, we rationalize things a lot, don't we? And instead of Daniel and his friends rationalizing, here's something that's powerful. They had already determined what they were going to do. Can I tell you something? You want to stand out for God? You have to make some decisions ahead of time. You can't wait until you find yourself in the fire to figure out what you're going to do. You have to make up your mind. I mean, think about it. You have to make up your mind that there are some places you're not going to go. I'm not going to go there. You have to make up your mind that there are some activities you're not going to participate in. You have to make up your mind that there are some behaviors that you are not going to be a part of. There is power, hear me, in a made-up mind. Paul said it this way, you are transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then I like what James says in his book in James. He talks about temptation. He talks about when you face opposition that God has made a way of escape. Can I suggest to you that part of that escape is already knowing in your mind what you will do and what you will not do? Oh, come on, I'm preaching this morning. That's part of the escape. Don't wait until you find yourself in the fire to figure out, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I be here? Should I not be here? Make up your mind, somebody. Make up your mind. And Daniel and his friends, they did this. But listen, it wasn't like a one-time thing. They lived this decision out daily. Think about it. Day out and day in, they stood out breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We're not eating from the king's table. We're taking a stand. We're not doing this. We've already made up our mind. And I think in the face of our culture today, I need to say this. This wasn't like a public show. This was not a protest. That's a word we hear a lot today. This was not a protest. This was a bold display of faith and trust in God. And knows what happens. Show me that next word. Verse 12. Here's what Daniel says. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. Daniel said, at the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. So again, the attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion, and he tested them for 10 days. Now again, this was not a protest. This was not a public show. Daniel did a couple things that we would be wise to do as well. You want to stand out? Notice number one what Daniel did. He honored authority. We preached a sermon series about a month or so ago. You can go online and watch it again. I encourage you to do that. How many of you know God's called us to be people of honor? God has called us to honor authority. And we even talked about how you don't have to agree with somebody to honor them. Do you think Daniel and his friends agreed with the king? No. But they showed respect. They showed honor to authority. And then the other thing they did is they had a plan. They weren't just winging this thing. They said, we've made up our mind. We can't do this, but what are we going to do? And they came up with a plan. They created the plan because I think Daniel, deep in his heart, knew this. How many of you know you can stand out in the wrong way? Yeah, you can. We can all stand out in the wrong way. True story, Fox News. I read this not too long ago. Fox News, April 2017. There was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio. In Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, but in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a lady, I hate to say this, who was not very smart, who stood out in the wrong way. She took her son to the barber to get his hair cut. And she thought the barber was too slow. And so she's complaining. Please, hurry up. I got to go somewhere. We got to get out of here. You're too slow. Hurry. And finally, she just had enough of it. She reached into her purse, pulled out her pistol, and she pointed it at the barber and said, I've got 2 clips. I will pop you. So now she's on the run over a $6 haircut. How many of you know you can stand out in the wrong way, somebody? You can be zealous and a fool. You can feel justified about something and be a jerk. We need God's wisdom to stand out and to stand up at the right time in the right way for the right things. How many of you know that? We need God's wisdom. And Daniel and his friends, they had God's wisdom. And notice what happens, how this part of the story concludes. It says, after 3 years of going through this training, the king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service because they were willing to stand out, because they were willing to honor God and to worship him. God blessed them. God promoted them. He gave them favor. But I want you to hear me, guys. Next week, we're going to learn about some other opposition that Daniel and his buddies found themselves in, because the enemy is always coming after us. And here's the reason why. Think about Daniel as we get ready to pray. If Daniel and his friends would have blended in, compromised, nothing historic would have probably happened. And you know, if they would have stubbornly refused to eat the king's food, they probably would have been executed. Here's what I know. Time and time again, you and I, we're tempted to blend in when God's called us to stand out. God's called us to be the light of the world, a city on a hill. He said you don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel. You don't live your life to blend in. You stand out. I don't know about you. I'd rather be remembered for standing out than be forgotten for blending in. And I like what Paul says again in Ephesians 6. He said, put on God's armor so that you can take a stand against the devil's tactics. He says, after you've put on God's armor, at the end of the day, you'll still be standing. You'll still be standing. Here's what I love about God. He says, if you're willing to stand out, I'll stand with you. That's what I love about God. You're not standing in your own strength. You're not out on an island all by yourself. God is with you. I love scripture that it says, if God is for you, then who can be against you? God's for us. He's with us. He's that friend that never leaves us, that never forsakes us. So we can stand out. We can live the kind of life that God has called us to live.